There is a strange kind of power that most people never understand. It is not being loud, it is not being rich, it is not having thousands of followers, and it is certainly not trying to prove that you are important. Real power begins when people realize that your presence is valuable, but your absence is expensive. Think about that for a moment. There are people you can ignore for weeks and nothing changes. And then there are people whose absence immediately creates a problem. When they stop answering, you notice. When they stop showing up, something is missing. When they leave, you suddenly understand how much they were actually doing. That is a very different kind of value. And the interesting thing is these people usually don't advertise it. They don't walk around saying, "You need me." They don't constantly remind people of what they bring to the table. They simply become so competent, so disciplined, so emotionally controlled, and so difficult to replace that people naturally become afraid of losing access to them. This is one of the deepest principles of human behavior. People rarely value what is constantly available. We adapt to abundance. If something is always there, we stop noticing it. But when access becomes limited, attention increases. Think about the person who responds instantly to every message, always available, always willing to help, always saying yes, always explaining themselves. At first, people appreciate them, but eventually something changes. Their availability becomes normal, and what becomes normal often becomes invisible. Now, compare that person with someone who is calm, capable, and selective. They don't respond to everything. They don't jump every time somebody calls. They don't need to be involved in every conversation. They have their own work, their own standards, their own direction. When they speak, people listen because they don't speak simply to fill silence. When they help, it means something because their help is not automatic. And when they leave, you feel the difference. That is value, not attention. Value. And there is a major difference between the two. Attention is when people notice you. Value is when your absence creates a problem. Most people spend their lives chasing attention when they should be building value. They want to be seen. They want to be praised. They want people to recognize them. But the person who becomes truly valuable thinks differently. They ask, what can I become so good at that replacing me becomes difficult? That question changes everything because now you're not trying to impress people. You're trying to become useful. You're trying to become reliable. You're trying to become rare. And rarity is one of the oldest forces in human psychology. If everyone can do something, it has less value. If almost nobody can do it, its value increases. This is why you should stop trying to be good at everything. Become exceptionally good at something that matters. Find the skill that other people avoid because it requires patience. Find the responsibility that other people don't want because it requires discipline. Find the problem that everybody complains about and become the person who knows how to solve it. That's how you become difficult to replace, not by demanding respect, by creating consequences when you're gone. But there is another part of this that most people completely misunderstand. You can be extremely competent and then still be easy to replace. Why? Because competence without emotional control can become a liability. Imagine someone who is brilliant at their job, but they are always angry, always reacting, always offended, always involved in drama. Every small problem becomes an emotional crisis. Eventually, people start thinking, yes, they're talented, but they're exhausting. And once people begin associating your value with emotional cost, your value starts decreasing. This is why calmness is not weakness. Calmness is leverage. When everyone else becomes emotional, the calm person becomes more valuable. When everyone else panics, the calm person becomes the reference point. When everyone else starts talking, the calm person starts observing. And observation gives you something most people lose when emotions take over perspective. You see what is actually happening. You notice who is nervous. You notice who is trying to impress someone. You notice who is hiding something. You notice who suddenly changes their behavior when a powerful person enters the room. And because you're not desperately trying to participate, you can actually read the room. This is why emotional discipline is such a powerful form of social intelligence. You don't need to react to everything you feel. You don't need to answer every insult. You don't need to defend yourself against every misunderstanding. And you certainly don't need to prove your worth every 5 minutes. Sometimes the strongest response is no response. Not because you are weak, because you understand that reacting gives other people control over your emotional state. Think about that. If somebody can insult you and immediately make you angry, they have access to you. If somebody can ignore you and immediately make you desperate for their attention, they have access to you. If somebody can criticize you and suddenly make you question your entire identity, they have access to you. Emotional independence begins when you stop handing strangers the remote control to your mind. And once you develop that independence, something interesting happens. People begin to treat you differently because they can feel when someone needs approval. And they can also feel when someone doesn't. There is a difference between confidence and performance. A person who is constantly announcing how confident they are usually isn't. Real confidence is quieter. It looks like someone who can walk into a room without needing to dominate it, someone who can hear criticism without immediately becoming defensive, someone who can admit I was wrong. Someone who can leave a conversation without getting the last word. Someone who doesn't need to win every small battle because they are focused on the larger game. That kind of person becomes rare, and rarity creates respect. But there is another principle you need to understand. Never make yourself completely predictable. I'm not talking about playing childish games. I'm talking about having a life that does not revolve around other people's expectations. If people know you will always say yes, your yes has little value. If they know you'll always be there, your presence becomes ordinary. If they know you will tolerate anything, they have no reason to respect your boundaries. You need standards, and standards create scarcity. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is numpy, no explanation, no emotional performance, no 20-minute justification, just no. Because every time you say yes to something meaningless, yeah, you are saying no to something that matters. Your time, your attention, your energy, your goals. And these are finite resources. The person who understands this becomes selective. They stop giving premium attention to low value situations. They stop arguing with people who are committed to misunderstanding them. They stop chasing people who have already shown disinterest. They stop trying to convince everyone of their worth. And they start investing their energy where it produces results. This is where discipline enters the picture, because being valuable is not something you announce. It is something you build quietly over years. You wake up when you don't feel like it. You work when nobody is watching. You practice when nobody is applauding. You keep promises you made to yourself. You learn when other people are distracted. You continue when motivation disappears. And eventually, the results become visible. That's when something changes. People begin to associate you with reliability. If you say you'll do something, you do it. If you accept responsibility, you carry it. If there is a difficult problem, people know you won't disappear. And reliability is one of the most underrated forms of power because talented people are common. Reliable people are rare. A lot of people can perform brilliantly for 3 days. Very few can perform consistently for 3 years. Consistency is what separates potential from mastery. And mastery creates value, but here's where many people make another mistake. They become valuable and then they become too available. They start answering every request, taking every opportunity, helping everyone, trying to become indispensable to everyone. And ironically, they weaken their own position because if you're available to everybody, you're probably not deeply valuable to anything. You need to protect your attention. Your attention is your life. Where you put it repeatedly becomes your identity. If you spend your attention on gossip, you become better at gossip. If you spend your attention on outrage, you become better at outrage. If you spend your attention on building a rare skill, you become better at something that can change your life. So ask yourself, what am I becoming exceptionally good at? Not what are you consuming? Not what are you watching? Not what are you talking about? What are you building? Because people eventually pay for results, not intentions. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Nobody owes you access. Nobody owes you attention. Nobody owes you respect. If you want those things, Create a reason for them. Become useful. Become disciplined. Become trustworthy. Become calm under pressure. Become someone whose judgment people trust. Become someone who can be counted on when things become difficult. And then stop trying so hard to be noticed. Let the results speak. There is enormous psychological power in not needing to announce yourself. When you constantly tell people how valuable you are asking them to believe you.
Mm.
When your behavior demonstrates it, they don't need convincing. This is why some people enter a room and immediately command attention without asking for it. Their reputation arrives before they do. They've built a history, a pattern, evidence, and evidence is more powerful than self promotion. So if you want people to fear losing access to you, don't manipulate them. Don't play games. Don't disappear just to make somebody chase you. That's insecurity disguised as strategy. Instead, build a life that you don't want to escape from. Build skills, build discipline, build emotional control, build a reputation for keeping your word, build standards, build independence, and most importantly, build something that is difficult to replace. Then your absence becomes meaningful naturally because people don't fear losing access to someone who desperately wants to be needed. They fear losing access to someone who doesn't need to be needed, but is extremely valuable to have. That's the paradox. The less desperate you are to be chosen, the more valuable your choice becomes. The less you need approval, the more authority you develop. The less you chase attention, the more attention your presence can command. And the less you depend on people, the more freely you can choose who deserves your time. So don't ask, how can I make people value me?
Mm.
Ask a much harder question. Who would I have to become for my absence to actually matter? Then work on becoming that person quietly, patiently, every day, because the ultimate form of value isn't being constantly seen, it's being deeply felt even when you're no longer in the room. But there is a deeper level to this. Becoming valuable is not the final goal. The real goal is becoming so internally stable that you don't need other people to confirm your value. Because here's the strange thing about human behavior. The moment you desperately need someone to recognize your importance, you give them power over you. You start checking whether they replied. You start wondering why they didn't invite you. You start comparing yourself to somebody else. You start changing your behavior just to remain desirable. And slowly you stop being yourself, you're performing, and people can feel that. They may not be able to explain it, but they can sense desperation. They can sense when someone is trying too hard. And the more you try to convince people that you're valuable, the less valuable you appear. Why? Because real value doesn't beg for recognition. Think about gold. Gold doesn't need to tell you that it's rare. Its scarcity already tells the story. And this principle applies to people. If your entire identity depends on being wanted, you become easy to control. But if you can walk away from what doesn't respect you, your position changes immediately. This is why boundaries are so powerful. A boundary is not a threat. It is not, if you do this, I'll punish you. A real boundary is, if this continues, I will remove myself. That's completely different. One tries to control another person. The other controls your own behavior, and that's where real power begins. You cannot control what people think. You cannot control whether someone respects you. You cannot control whether someone stays, but you can control what you tolerate, and what you repeatedly tolerate teaches people how to treat you. If you tolerate disrespect 10 times and complain about it on the 11th, people don't remember your complaint, they remember your previous 10 permissions. That's why standards have to be demonstrated, not announced. You don't need to say, respect me. You need to behave like someone who respects himself. You leave conversations that become abusive. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop chasing people who repeatedly show you that they don't value your presence. You stop negotiating against yourself, and something interesting happens. People begin to understand that access to you has conditions, not because you're arrogant, but because your life has structure. This is one of the reasons disciplined people are so attractive. They are not available for every impulse. They have priorities. They have routines. They have things they refuse to sacrifice. Their emotions don't completely dictate their schedule. Their mood doesn't determine whether they keep their promises. And that creates something very rare, predictability in character. Without predictability in availability, people know who you are, but they don't assume they can always have you. That's powerful because uncertainty creates attention, but character creates trust. You need both. If you're unpredictable as a person, people don't trust you. If you're predictable in everything, people stop noticing you. The balance is simple. Be consistent in your principles. Be selective with your access. Let people know what you stand for, but don't let everyone have unlimited access to you. And this applies to relationships, business, friendships, and even family. You don't have to disappear from people's lives. You simply stop making yourself infinitely available because unlimited access destroys appreciation. Imagine a restaurant that is always empty. You can walk in whenever you want. There is no waiting, no reservation, no difficulty. Eventually, you don't think about it. Now imagine the opposite. You need a reservation. There are limited tables. The experience is consistently excellent. People plan around it. Suddenly, access has psychological value. Again, this isn't about manipulating people. It's about understanding that scarcity changes perception. Your attention is scarce. Your time is scarce. Your energy is scarce. Your emotional availability is scarce. So stop giving these things away casually. And there is one area where this becomes especially important, your words. Most people talk too much. They explain too much. They reveal too much. They promise too much. They react too quickly. And then they wonder why people don't take them seriously. Your words gain weight when they become less frequent and more deliberate. You don't have to respond immediately. You can think, you can pause, you can observe. You can let someone finish speaking. You can allow silence to exist without rushing to destroy it. Silence makes insecure people uncomfortable, but it gives observant people information. When you stop filling every silence, other people start revealing themselves. They keep talking, they explain, they justify, they expose what they actually want. And you learn this is why calm people often seem more intelligent than they actually are. They're not necessarily smarter. They simply don't waste their attention reacting to everything. They watch first, then they decide, and that habit alone can completely change your social position because most people respond emotionally while the disciplined person responds strategically. That difference compounds. One emotional reaction can destroy a reputation built over years. One impulsive message can damage a relationship. One angry decision can cost you an opportunity. So, emotional discipline isn't just about looking calm, it's about protecting your future self from your present emotions. Ask yourself before you react, will this matter tomorrow? If the answer is no, don't give it today. If someone insults you, you don't have to prove anything. If someone misunderstands you, you don't have to write an essay defending yourself. If someone doesn't appreciate what you bring, you don't have to beg them to see it. Sometimes the most powerful move is to redirect your energy because attention is a currency. And every time you obsess over someone else's opinion, you are spending that currency. Spend it carefully, spend it on mastery, spend it on your health, spend it on your work, spend it on relationships that actually have depth, spend it on becoming the kind of person your future depends on. And eventually, something strange happens. People who once ignored you start asking what changed. Nothing changed overnight. You changed quietly. You became less reactive, more disciplined, more selective, more competent, more independent. And people notice independence because independence removes leverage. If someone knows you cannot leave, they have leverage. If someone knows you desperately need their approval, they have leverage. If someone knows you'll tolerate anything just to keep them, they have leverage. But when you can genuinely walk away, the relationship becomes a choice, and choice is power. This doesn't mean becoming cold. That's another mistake. Some people hear this message and decide they should become emotionally unavailable. They stop caring. They stop helping. They stop trusting. They turn themselves into a wall. That's not strength. That's fear. The strongest person can care deeply without becoming dependent. They can love someone without losing themselves. They can help someone without needing gratitude. They can be generous without becoming desperate. They can walk away without becoming bitter. That's emotional freedom. And emotional freedom makes you rare because most people are controlled by one of two forces: the desire to be accepted or the fear of being rejected. If you can escape both, you become extraordinarily difficult to manipulate. You don't have to impress, you don't have to chase, you don't have to retaliate. You simply observe reality and respond accordingly. This is also why reputation matters so much. Your reputation is built from repeated behavior, not one great moment, not one viral success, not one impressive conversation. People watch patterns. Do you keep your word? Do you remain calm under pressure? Do you take responsibility? Do you treat people well when you have nothing to gain? Do you remain disciplined when nobody is watching? Do you become arrogant when you succeed? Do you collapse when you fail? These are the things people remember. And eventually, your reputation begins working for you. You don't have to convince people you're capable. Someone else says it. You don't have to explain that you're trustworthy. Your history demonstrates it. You don't have to tell people you're disciplined. Your results make the argument. This is the highest level of personal branding, not what you say about yourself, what other people can reliably say about you. And once that reputation becomes strong enough, you become a magnet for opportunities because people trust certainty. They trust the person who has demonstrated consistency. They trust the person who doesn't panic when things go wrong. They trust the person who doesn't disappear when responsibility becomes uncomfortable. That's why becoming rare is not about becoming mysterious. It's about becoming dependable in ways that are difficult to find. Be the person who can solve the problem. Be the person who can stay calm. Be the person who can make the difficult decision. Be the person who doesn't need constant supervision. Be the person who can be trusted with something important. Because when you become that person, people don't just like having you around, they build around you. And now we reach the most important principle. Never become indispensable by making people dependent on your weakness. Become valuable by strengthening yourself. There is a difference. A manipulator makes people afraid to leave. A valuable person makes people understand what they would lose. One creates fear, the other creates appreciation. You don't want people trapped around you. You want them choosing you because your presence genuinely improves their lives. That's a much higher form of power. And it begins with a simple decision. Stop asking how to become more desirable. Start asking how to become more useful. Stop asking how to get more attention. Start asking how to create more value. Stop asking how to make people chase you. Start building a life that you don't need anyone to complete. Stop trying to look rare. Learn what others refuse to learn. Practice what others refuse to practice. Control what others refuse to control. And stay consistent long after everyone else gets bored. Because eventually, the difference becomes obvious. You won't need to tell people you're different. They'll experience it. They'll notice that you don't panic. They'll notice that you don't chase. They'll notice that you don't complain about every inconvenience. They'll notice that your word means something. They'll notice that you can leave without creating chaos. And they'll notice something else. When you're gone, things don't feel quite the same. That is the kind of value you should build, not value that demands attention, value that creates absence, not popularity, reputation, not constant availability, selective access, not emotional dependence, emotional independence, not the appearance of discipline, actual discipline, and not a personality designed to make people fear losing you, but a character so strong that losing you would genuinely be a loss. Because in the end, the most powerful position you can reach is this: you don't need everyone, you don't chase everyone, you don't impress everyone, you don't explain yourself to everyone. You simply become so focused on becoming better that the right people naturally recognize your value, and the wrong people eventually lose access to it. That's when you know you've built something real. When your confidence no longer depends on being chosen, when your peace no longer depends on being understood, when your discipline no longer depends on motivation, and when your value no longer depends on attention. At that point, you become rare, not because there is nobody else like you, but because there are very few people willing to do what you were willing to do for as long as you were willing to do it. and that is the secret. Be calm, be disciplined, be useful, be selective, become difficult to replace. Then stop worrying about whether people recognize your value, because eventually they will. And if they don't, you'll still have something even more valuable, yourself. There is one final level to this. Once you become valuable, you have to learn how to protect that value, because building something rare is difficult, but maintaining it can be even harder. The moment people discover that you're reliable, capable, calm, and useful, they will naturally start asking more from you, more favors, more time, more attention, more responsibility. And if you're not careful, your greatest strength can become your greatest weakness, because the person who is always capable often becomes the person everyone depends on. At first, it feels good. People need you. People trust you. People come to you when something goes wrong, but slowly your life becomes crowded with other people's priorities. And eventually you realize something uncomfortable. You became valuable to everyone, but unavailable to yourself. That is not mastery. That's overextension. You cannot become rare while constantly giving yourself away. So one of the most important skills you need to develop is the ability to say, not this time, not because you don't care, because you understand limits. A person with no limits eventually becomes resentful. They say yes when they want to say no. They help when they don't have the energy. They accept things they secretly hate, and then one day they explode. The problem wasn't that they were too generous. The problem was that their generosity had no structure. Real generosity is chosen, it is not forced. You should be able to help someone and also be able to walk away. You should be able to give without needing to be needed. That's the difference between strength and dependency. And there is another reason people become less valuable: when they overextend themselves, their performance declines, they become tired, distracted, irritated, inconsistent, and suddenly the person who used to be reliable isn't reliable anymore. So protecting your energy is not selfish, it is strategic. You need enough energy to remain excellent, because your value isn't created by how much you do. It is created by the quality of what you do. A surgeon doesn't become valuable because they perform 20 surgeries a day. They become valuable because when the difficult case arrives, their skill matters. A great negotiator doesn't need to speak for 6 hours. They need to know exactly when to speak and exactly when to remain silent. A master doesn't prove mastery through constant activity. They prove it through precision. And this is where most people misunderstand discipline. They think discipline means doing more. Sometimes discipline means doing less, less talking, less scrolling, less arguing, less explaining, less social drama, less pointless consumption, less chasing, less reacting. The more noise you remove, the more power you have available for what matters. And this brings us to something even deeper: attention. Your attention is one of the most valuable things you own. Where your attention goes, your life follows. If you spend hours thinking about people who don't respect you, you are giving them part of your life for free. If you spend your evenings comparing yourself to strangers, you are building their lives inside your head instead of building your own. If you constantly monitor what other people are doing, you lose the ability to see where you're going. The rare person does something different. They become obsessed with direction, not comparison. Direction. They ask, where am I going? What am I building? What skill am I developing? What kind of person am I becoming? These questions are powerful because they move your attention away from the social scoreboard and back toward your own development. And once you stop constantly comparing, you become calmer, because comparison is one of the easiest ways to destroy peace. There will always be someone richer, someone younger, someone more attractive, someone more successful, someone with more followers, someone with a better car, someone with a bigger house. If your identity depends on being ahead, you will never feel secure, because there is always another person ahead. The solution is not to win the comparison. The solution is to stop playing the wrong game. Measure yourself against who you were. Did you become more disciplined, more skilled, more patient, more emotionally controlled, more courageous, more useful? If the answer is yes, you're winning the game that actually matters. And strangely, That internal progress eventually becomes visible externally. People notice the person who no longer needs to compete. They notice someone who can congratulate another person's success without feeling threatened. They notice someone who can walk into a room full of impressive people and remain completely comfortable being themselves. That is emotional security. And emotional security creates presence. You don't have to dominate the room. You don't have to tell everyone what you've accomplished. You don't have to mention your connections. You don't have to make sure everybody knows how successful you are. You can simply be there, calm, observant, comfortable. And when you speak, your words have weight. Why? Because you haven't spent the last 30 minutes trying to prove something. You have been paying attention, and people trust people who pay attention. This is also why listening is such an underrated form of power. When you listen, you learn. When you constantly speak, you reveal. Every person you meet knows something you don't. They have experiences you don't have. They have information you don't have. They have motives you haven't discovered. If you're always trying to impress them, you miss all of it. So learn to listen, not passively, strategically. Listen to what people say. Listen to what they avoid saying. Listen to what they become emotional about. Listen to how they describe other people. Because the way someone talks about others often tells you how they will eventually talk about you. And this is why becoming socially intelligent is part of becoming valuable. Technical skill can make you useful. Social intelligence makes you difficult to replace. You need to understand people, not manipulate them. Understand them. What motivates them? What scares them? What do they value? What makes them feel respected? What makes them defensive? What are they trying to prove? What are they protecting? The better you understand human behavior, the less personally you take. Someone becomes rude, instead of immediately thinking, they hate me, you think something is happening inside them. Someone becomes distant. Instead of begging for an explanation, you observe. Someone suddenly becomes overly friendly after ignoring you for months. You don't immediately celebrate. You ask, what changed? This doesn't make you cynical. It makes you observant, and observation gives you options. The emotional person reacts, the observant person decides. That's a huge difference. Now, there's another thing that makes people rare, keeping your word. It sounds simple, but think about how many people make promises they never keep. I'll call you. I'll send it tomorrow. I'll start Monday. I'll be there. I'm going to change. People become so accustomed to broken promises that someone who consistently keeps theirs becomes remarkable. Your word should have weight. If you say something, mean it. If you can't do something, say no. Don't promise what you cannot deliver simply because you want to be liked in the moment. A short term yes can create a long term reputation problem. And reputation compounds. Every promise kept adds another layer of trust. Every promise broken removes one. Over years, the difference becomes enormous. This is why your reputation is not something you create with advertising. You create it with repetition, day after day, decision after decision, conversation after conversation. And eventually, people know what to expect from you, not because you're predictable in every behavior, but because you're predictable in character. That's powerful. They know you won't betray them for a temporary advantage. They know you won't collapse under pressure. They know you won't create unnecessary drama. They know you won't abandon responsibility when things become difficult. That kind of reputation becomes an invisible asset, and invisible assets often become the most valuable ones. Trust, judgment, discipline, relationships, experience, self-control. These things don't look impressive on social media, but they determine who gets trusted when something important is at stake. And that is the real difference between appearing valuable and actually being valuable. Appearance can get attention. Substance creates dependence. But remember, dependence is not the goal. Respect is. You don't want someone thinking, I can't survive without this person. You want them thinking, my life is better because this person is in it. That's healthier, that's stronger, and it lasts longer because fear can hold people temporarily, but value makes people choose you repeatedly. This is why you should never build relationships around control. Build them around contribution. Ask, what becomes better because I'm here? Do people think more clearly after talking to you? Do problems become easier? Do people feel calmer? Do you make things more organized? Do you bring expertise? Do you bring honesty? Do you bring discipline? Do you bring perspective? If your presence consistently improves the environment, people will naturally want you around. You won't need to manipulate access. You won't need to disappear. You won't need to create artificial scarcity. Your value will create its own scarcity because there is only one you. There is only one combination of your experience, your skills, your judgment, your relationships, your perspective, and your character. That combination becomes increasingly difficult to reproduce, and that's what being rare actually means. Not that nobody can do what you do, but that nobody can do it exactly the way you do it. So stop trying to become a copy of someone else. Learn from people, study them, understand them, but don't become them. The goal is not to become another successful person. The goal is to become the strongest version of your own potential. And that takes time, which brings us to the most uncomfortable part. You cannot become rare quickly. There is no shortcut around years of repetition. Everyone wants the result. Very few people want the boredom that creates it. They want mastery, but they don't want practice. They want discipline, but they don't want routine. They want respect, but they don't want responsibility. They want confidence, but they don't want failure. They want to be rare, but they don't want to spend years doing what most people refuse to do. That's the price. You become rare by staying when things become boring. You become disciplined by keeping going when motivation disappears. You become calm by surviving situations that once made you panic. You become confident by repeatedly doing difficult things. You become valuable by repeatedly solving difficult problems. There is no magic. There is accumulation. One decision, then another, and eventually your identity changes. You stop asking yourself, can I do this? Because you've done difficult things before. You stop panicking when something goes wrong because you've learned that problems can be solved. You stop needing constant approval because you've built evidence that you can trust yourself. And that is perhaps the deepest form of confidence. Self-trust, not believing you're perfect, knowing that if something goes wrong, you can handle it. If you lose money, you can rebuild. If someone leaves, you can continue. If you fail, you can learn. If the plan collapses, you can create another one. That mindset makes you dangerous in the best possible way because you're no longer protecting a fragile identity. You're building a resilient one, and resilient people are difficult to control. They don't need perfect circumstances. They don't need everyone to agree. They don't need constant reassurance. They adapt. And adaptation is one of the highest forms of intelligence. The world changes, people change, markets change, relationships change, your own priorities change. If your identity depends on everything remaining the same, you will constantly suffer. But if you become adaptable, change becomes information, failure becomes feedback, rejection becomes redirection, difficulty becomes training, and suddenly life itself becomes your teacher. That is how you become rare, not by escaping difficulty, but by using it. Every difficult person can teach you patience. Every failure can teach you strategy. Every rejection can teach you independence. Every mistake can teach you awareness. Every period of loneliness can teach you self-sufficiency. You don't have to enjoy these experiences. You just have to extract the lesson. Because the person who learns from everything eventually becomes difficult to defeat. And once you reach that level, you don't need people to fear losing you. You become someone they genuinely don't want to lose. That's the difference. You don't manufacture scarcity. You become scarce. You don't demand respect. You become respectable. You don't chase attention. You become interesting. You don't ask people to value your time. You value it yourself. You don't force people to miss you. You build a presence worth remembering, and eventually your life becomes quieter, not because you've lost everyone, because you've stopped needing everyone. You have fewer distractions, fewer pointless conversations, fewer meaningless relationships, fewer emotional battles. But the relationships that remain are deeper. The work that remains is more meaningful, and the person you become is stronger. So if you want people to fear losing access to you, don't spend your life trying to make yourself harder to get. make yourself harder to replace. Become the person who brings clarity when everyone else brings confusion. Become the person who brings discipline when everyone else makes excuses. Become the person who brings calm when everyone else panics. Become the person who brings solutions when everyone else brings problems. Become the person who keeps their word when everyone else makes promises. Become the person who can leave without hatred and stay without desperation. That is rare, and rare things don't need to advertise themselves. They are recognized by their absence. So build quietly, learn quietly, improve quietly. Let your reputation travel ahead of you. Let your results introduce you. Let your discipline become visible through your life. And when people finally realize what you bring, don't become arrogant, stay calm, because the moment you start believing you are irreplaceable, you stop improving. There is always another level, another skill, another weakness to confront, another part of yourself to master. Stay humble enough to learn and confident enough to walk away from what diminishes you. That's the balance. Strong, but not arrogant. Kind, but not desperate. Available, but not accessible to everyone. Confident, but not attention seeking. Disciplined, but not rigid. Calm, but not passive. Independent, but not isolated. And valuable without needing to announce your value. That is the person you should become, because when you reach that point, people won't hold on to you because you forced them to. They'll hold on to you because they understand something. Very simple people like you are difficult to find, and once found, even harder to replace. So don't spend another year asking, how do I make people value me? Build the answer. Become the answer. Become so disciplined that your promises become predictable. Become so calm that pressure reveals your strength instead of your weakness. Become so skilled that your absence creates a gap. Become so independent that rejection cannot control you. Become so selective that your attention becomes meaningful. Become so consistent that your reputation speaks before you do. And become so focused on your own growth, that you stop needing the world to applaud you, because eventually the applause becomes irrelevant. The real victory is waking up one morning and realizing you no longer need to chase. You don't chase respect. You don't chase validation. You don't chase attention. You don't chase people. You don't chase opportunities. You build yourself and let the world respond. That is what it means to become rare, not to become unreachable, to become undeniable. And once you become undeniable, you don't need everyone to choose you. You only need to become someone worth choosing.